Okay, sorry for the delayed start on this one, but welcome to the Night Hackers, to the Virtual Jug listeners, and of course to everyone here at Javaland. Joining me today is Bertrand.
Yes.
Bertrand Schrijver.
Schrijver, yes.
Schrijver, very good. How are you, Bertrand?
I'm good, I'm fine, I'm enjoying Javaland so far.
Awesome. And this is the first day of Javaland for those who haven't been watching Night Hacking. So welcome to everyone from VJug. Javaland is a conference here in Germany in Cologne, or Köln.
Brühl.
Brühl.
Yes, in Brühl, near Köln.
And this is actually my fourth year speaking at Javaland, and I've enjoyed watching it grow actually as a conference. You've already given a session on Jenkins 2.
Yes,
Yeah.
I had the early bird slot tomorrow at 8:30.
Okay.
And even though there were people who were believing that you couldn't fill up a room at 8:30, we had quite a nice turnout, so
Awesome.
I had some fun this morning.
And we're going to be giving the same session here today, right? So this is going to be, in fact, let me show your screen. Now we've actually got this. Working. I can show your screen. So pipeline as code, building continuous delivery pipelines with Jenkins 2.
Yes, it is.
So Jenkins 2, how new is that?
About a year ago was released. There's still quite a lot of developments going on, especially around the pipelines part and visualization and such. So I'll demo most of this new stuff in the next hour or so.
Okay.
Shall we get started then?
Let's, why not? Let's get started. So let me, please do go ahead.
All right. Are we good on the stream?
We are good now.
All right. So I'm going to be talking about pipeline as code and show all the new stuff that's up in Jenkins 2. So my name is Bertrand Schrijver. I work at JPoint in the Netherlands, which is a Java consulting shop. I also work at Open Value, which is a company that is consulting on continuous delivery and DevOps, basically anything that makes companies deliver better software faster. I also run the NLJUG, which is the Netherlands Java user group. We have 4,000 members, we organize a few conferences, and we publish our own printed magazine. And my current assignment is at the Dutch National Police, where we are using Jenkins 2, but I'm not going to tell too much about the police for obvious reasons. I am a Java champion and a Java 1 rock star.
And that's really recent, right?
That's fresh.
So congratulations.
Yes, thank you. So let's start. Let's see if my mic is good. I might be a bit.
Sure. Try now.
Are we good?
Yeah?
Still, I think still a bit soft.
You're pretty much on full.
All right, then I'll just talk a bit louder. So the next 50 minutes or so, I'll start by sharing some definitions. I'll show quickly some stuff in Jenkins 1, just as a baseline. I'll thoroughly explain what's all new in Jenkins 2, focusing on the pipeline as code feature. I'll go in depth with pipelines, and I'll share some experiences from Jenkins 2 in the wild. So a word of thanks to Alex Soto from Red Hat, who gave me some input for this talk, and also to Kosuke Kawaguchi from CloudBees, who provided me with some input for this talk. So let's start with some definitions. Continuous integration, we're probably all doing this. It was where team members integrate their work frequently, and everything is verified by an automated build and test suite. Kind of the next step is continuous delivery, where you're building and testing software in such a way that your software is always in a releasable state, you're always ready to go to production. And if you actually deploy every change to production, then we're talking about continuous deployment. So every commit you do gets verified by an automated pipeline, and once it's the pipeline is all right, all the verification is all right, it gets pushed to production automatically. So it's continuous deployment for everyone. I wouldn't necessarily say so. It depends on your business case, whether it's important for you to get new features out there as fast as possible. Most clients I work with usually only deploy after each sprint to production.
So I was going to ask, where people the teams you work with, where would they sit on this?
Yeah, they're typically in the continuous delivery side of things. Continuous deployment can be interesting if you're working with huge amounts of people and want to make the amount of code you put to production as small as possible. It can also help when you're in a competitive race with some competitor where it really matters to get that new feature out an hour faster than the competitor. But most clients are a bit less high-paced and they're fine with just deploying to production after each sprint. Mm-hmm. And then there are pipelines. The pipeline is an automated sequence of steps that deliver software from version control into the hands of your end users. So I'm always saying it doesn't count until it's in production. And a pipeline is basically everything that's necessary, all necessary steps when a developer pushes something to version control, to build it, to test it, to deploy it, and to get it into the hands of your end users. So about Jenkins, it's been around for a while, over 10 years, and it's kind of grown to being the de facto tool in software automation and beyond. There are over 120K active installations, and Jenkins is mission critical for most of its users. A survey was done recently, and over 90% told that Jenkins was mission critical for their software delivery process. And version 2 was the first major release in years. So lots of small changes have come over the years, but version 2 was a big release for the Jenkins team. So why is Jenkins so successful? Why is there such a large installed user base and has it been around for so long? I think this is mainly because of the huge set of integrations and plugins that are available for Jenkins. It integrates with possibly every thinkable step in the delivery pipeline. Think about handling code and commits, builds, tests, releases, deployments. And this is made possible by over 1,000 Jenkins plugins that you can just mostly grab for free, install, and start using them. So Jenkins has grown from being an automation server to a broader spectrum, where it's now matured to being a full swing continuous delivery solution. So let's start with our first demo. And this demo will still be in Jenkins 1. Let me blow that up a bit. If I can grab my screen, I can. So I got the latest Jenkins 1 version running here. And I have a simple application that I've configured a build for here. So let's dive into the application first. It's a Spring Boot application. Could have been any application, just a small example. Let's take a look at the POM. There's a few Spring dependencies in there just to get things started. And then there are 2 build plugins. One that will create an executable jar that I can run on whichever server I like. And there's a plugin that provides some Git information in the build, so I can view which is the version of my application at runtime. So there's a small application that's just the Spring wiring, and then there's one controller that listens to the endpoint/greeting. It will take a request parameter name, it will add it to the model, and then dispatch a template called greeting. This is a time leaf template. You could make it a REST endpoint, whatever you like, but I chose to do this. And it's just kind of JSP-like, where it will output the name that was sent in the request. So fairly simple application. So take a look at how it's running. I've deployed it to Cloud Foundry at Pivotal because it's very easy to do so. Could have chosen any cloud, but I chose to do this. And let's fetch our greeting. It's now saying hello world. Let's say pass a name and say VJug, and I will say hello VJug. So that's our fairly complex enterprise application we'll use for the demo. So I've configured the Jenkins build here. And this is a traditional Jenkins 1.x build. I'll give it a go just so we can see that it works. And in the meantime, we'll look at the configuration. So this has some basic stuff that's typically in basic Java build. So we do log rotation, we clean up, we keep only the last 10 builds, so we clean up older builds. There's a link to the accompanying GitHub project where you can also view the source. There is a Git repository where it pulls the source from. We're building whenever a change is pushed to GitHub. We'll set the build name equal to 1.0.the-build number, because I'm also using this as the release version, so they can easily relate builds to the deployed application online. As pre-steps in the build, I'm setting the build number in the Spring Boot application properties. I use Maven to update the version of the in the Maven POM. So this is actually a very lightweight release mechanism. So typically for releases, you would use the Maven release plugin, which is kind of big, and some would call it the beast to use. So I typically use just the Maven versions plugin to change the version number at runtime, then build a jar, push it to some artifact repository, and then deploy it. Then there's the build itself, which is a Maven clean package that will produce an executable jar. And then in the post actions, I've configured the push to Cloud Foundry plugin, where I'll just say, here's my credentials, here's the API, deploy this jar to this environment. And then there's a manifest, which is configured in the application, which contains some basic information like this is the name, this is the host, it's this jar, memory, quota, stuff like that. So it should be almost done by now. Take a look at the logs. Here we see the typical Maven output. Here the Git properties are set. Then the tests are run, actually firing up the Spring Boot container to do an integration test. And when all is done, it will get pushed to Cloud Foundry, and we see that it has succeeded. So this was built 1.0.24. Let's see if that thing is deployed. I have the build info here, and that's indeed the one. So this basic build works. So I'll shut down my Jenkins 1 instance. And usually I would do the upgrade live on stage, but I don't want to keep you waiting too long, so I've prepared an upgraded version of the same workspace.
Can you make that slightly bigger?
Yeah, I will. So this is the result of the same workspace I was showing you before, but then already upgraded to Jenkins 2. So I'll let that run now. So what's new in Jenkins 2? The out-of-the-box experience has improved. So before Jenkins was fairly limited when you would just install it, and you would end up installing loads of plugins for stuff like Maven and other integrations afterwards in order to make it usable. So now there's a reasonable set of default plugins installed when you get started. So you can get started right away. GitHub integration is installed by default too. Jenkins is secured by default now, and this seems like a small change. So when it first boots, it will display a temporary admin password in the Jenkins console, in the terminal, that you can use to initially log in. But this is kind of a big thing, knowing that there are bots that are actively scanning the internet for unsecured Jenkins instances. So if you wouldn't set a password, then it would be a matter of time before somebody somewhere would probably log into your Jenkins instance and start doing interesting stuff with it. So the UI has been revamped. There are some small changes. They're good, but they're not really that big. The big new feature is pipeline as code. And that's what I'll be talking about next. So in general, more code to use it, to configure it, less GUI, less clicking, and there's less state stored, so it's also easier restartable. And the most important thing is Jenkins 2 is a drop-in upgrade. So you can just take your 1.6 workspace, install Jenkins 2 over it, or in my case, just take a Docker container with Jenkins 2 and run it pointing to the same workspace. And then it will start upgrading your 1.6 version to 2.0. And actually you can get started by using it right away without even going to the upgrade wizard. So do you have any questions so far, Simon?
Nothing in IRC, but if people do have questions, please do ping those in directly into IRC. Yeah, apologies. It seems to be streaming in 480 at the moment rather than 720. So we'll just try and make everything slightly bigger. But
yeah, well, I'll zoom and then we'll be good.
I'm trying to find a way of changing it, but probably can't do it live. But we'll see.
They'll be fine. So pipeline as code is the key new feature, and it really takes Jenkins to the next step where you can use it for more complex automations and more continuous delivery-alike use cases. And basically it allows you to describe whatever you want to automate in text and put it in version control. So we're typically used to writing text and putting it in the version control because that's what we do when we code, right? So Jenkins pipelines are just code. They're a Groovy script or a slightly different type, and you typically store it in version control definitions. So before this was possible, if you would put your entire Jenkins config in version control, or you would use stuff like the configuration management plugin, then you could see changes between builds, but still it wouldn't really work that well. While we have fairly good version control systems like Git, we can now use to put our pipeline definitions in. So you can start out fairly simple. and then the pipelines will grow with you from simple use case to complex use cases. And you can handle lots and lots of jobs without repeating yourself too much. Well, before, a typical use case would be that you create one job that you were happy with, and if you needed to add other jobs, you would just copy that job, or maybe use some sort of templating or configuration slicing, but it would usually end up in repeating yourself quite a lot. With pipeline as code, you can just create reusable build steps. So since it's Groovy code, you can just say, I got my reusable step here, I'll put it in a Groovy file, and then I will reuse this in all my other builds. Pipelines survive Jenkins restarts, which can come in handy if you want to upgrade Jenkins every now and then. And they bring the next level of reuse to Jenkins, which I really like. So, as of not so long ago, there are two types of pipeline definitions. The first one is scripted pipelines. And a scripted pipeline is basically a Groovy script you use to describe your chain of automation. So a Groovy script is fairly flexible. You can just create functions and call other classes and even call the Jenkins or plugin Java APIs. So they're fairly good for reuse. It's also pretty compact. And then there's the declarative style of pipelines, which is a bit more verbose. But you don't need any Groovy experience, since it's a DSL you can use to configure your jobs. It does have some advantages in that there's automated syntax checking. You can use an API to lint your Jenkins files. And there's also a visual editor, which is still in beta, but it will allow you to visually create your pipelines and then generate the accompanying pipeline code out of the visual description of the pipeline. That's pretty neat. So let's take a look at our first pipeline. Is this all right on the screen, the font size?
Yeah, no, we've got it as, I've managed to get it up to 1080p now, so we're...
So now we're crisp.
Look at that.
Very well. So this starts with allocating a node. And a node is a Jenkins executor node that the build will run on. So if you were just running a single Jenkins instance, then you can only run on one node, which is the master node. But in more complex installations, you typically have one master node which does all the orchestration and the administration. Then you'll have one or more executor nodes that will perform the heavy lifting work for you. So here I'm telling it to run on a node with a label Java 8. So Jenkins will find the next available executor which has this label attached to it. And then there are 4 stages. And a stage is I'll call it a recognizable step, which is a part of your pipeline. So you can define stages however you like. A stage has separate logs, is visible separately in the pipeline GUI, and is timed separately in the pipeline GUI. So this kind of helps in determining which stages would work for your build. So in the first stage, I'm just adding Maven, the installed tool Maven, to the path. There are different ways to do this, but this was nice and short and simple. The second stage is a checkout, where I'll tell Jenkins to check out my Git project. The third stage is the build stage, where I'm executing the Maven build. And here I'm using a shell step, which is just a generic execute shell command step. And I'm telling Maven to create a jar of my project. There are some command line options there that will smooth things out a bit when running on CI environments, but nothing that's really too important for now. And in the final stage, I'll archive the JUnit test results by saying you can find the test build. So the next step is see how this pipeline will look in the declarative syntax, which is fairly the same. As you can see, it's a bit longer, it's a bit less compact, but still the 4 stages, the definitions are fairly the same. A declarative pipeline always starts with the pipeline block. Then you choose an agent to run on. You define which tools are installed, and then there are the 4 stages that are fairly the same to the scripted variant. Except for that, there's a stages block that's surrounding it, and there's a steps block that's surrounding all steps. And these extra lines in the pipeline help in processing it, linting it, validating it, and using it in the visual pipeline editor. So it's time for the second demo, which is actually a demo I'll be showing you from my slides, but it's kind of a demo. So if you start up Jenkins 2, freshly started Jenkins 2 on your Jenkins 1.6 workspace, you get greeted with this, this screen. And everything is looking still pretty much the same. There's just this big upgrade now button. You can use it if you like now, but if you click to upgrade, then all the pipeline stuff will get installed. So you click upgrade, you get greeted with the upgrade wizard, which will present you with a few scenarios you can install plugins for. I generally pick them all since they're fairly sensible. It's the pipeline stuff, it's the GitHub stuff, and it's the pipeline view stuff. So when preparing this demo, I ran into a minor issue in Jenkins, which is that if you have in the top right, you probably can't see it if I move my mouse, but in the top right there's an enable auto refresh button. So typically you have this turned on, and then Jenkins will refresh every 5 seconds or so. So if you have this enabled during the installation, the refresh kicks in and the upgrade wizard will disappear. So then you're kind of in the dark on the progress of your upgrade. So this puzzled me a few times, finally found it out. So I took the effort to report it to the Jenkins team, which I did a few days ago. So I have it here. I'll zoom in a bit. And then the Jenkins team said, well, I don't think that much users use the auto refresh, so probably it's minor. So we've all been there, right? You report an issue, you think it's the most important issue in the world, and then someone says, nah, it's a minor. Well, that's not for me. So this morning I did this talk here at JavaLand, and I asked the audience, who is using this, this feature? So I have a picture of that question.
This is a good way to get around the virtual audience, right?
Yeah. So here it is. So everyone is using the auto refresh feature. Well, not really. There was I was just kidding, but I did ask them to raise their hands, and about 33 to 50% of the attendees use this feature. So I hope this will stimulate the Jenkins team to step it up a notch. But we'll see about that. For now, just disable the auto refresh, and you'll be good. Then you'll be greeted with a progress screen that will show you some progress on the plugins that are being installed, since it's just installing a set of plugins. This will take anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes, depending on your machine and the internet connection. And when it's done, it will tell you that it's done, and you're good to go. So let's start. I have my Jenkins 2 running
Do you increase
here.
the font
Yeah,
size?
I'll increase it. So here's Jenkins 2. And just to make sure that the upgrade went well, I just run my traditional point and click build once more. Let me log in first. Just so you can see that the build that worked before the upgrade will still work after the upgrade. So I have created a pipeline definition for my demo project. And this is stored in a file called Jenkins file. And the convention is to put the Jenkins file in the root of your code repository where your code also lives. So kind of the same like a Docker file. So I've placed it in the root of my example project. And let's see what's in there. I'm adding... Sorry about that.
Bless. Bless.
There's usually 3, so there might be one more up in the pipeline. I'm adding Maven to the path here. I'm setting the, I'm determining the version number of my build, setting the current display name of the build to the version. Then there's this cryptic string where I'm setting some build properties. I'll explain more about this later. You see that you don't need to type this off the top of your head. What I'm doing here is telling it to rotate my logs to only keep the last 10 builds. So this is the same thing I'd configured in the example build. I'll link it to my GitHub project and say there's a GitHub push trigger. So these are the basic build properties that I configured in the traditional build as well. There's the checkout stage, where we'll fetch it from Git. There's the version stage, where I will set the version application properties, change the Maven version. There's the build stage, the archive stage, and then all that's left to do is deploy it to Cloud Foundry in this case. So here there's something different, because when I was preparing this talk, there wasn't a pipeline version of the Cloud Foundry deploy post-build action yet. I haven't checked if it's there now, But you will run into this every now and then because the pipeline stuff is still fairly new, and not all plugin vendors have and plugin projects have adapted their plugins to also have an entry for the pipeline way of calling a plugin. So I've just rolled it my own here. I'm using the credentials binding plugin, which is fairly useful, I found. What this will do is it will go to the Jenkins credentials repository, where I've already configured my Cloud Foundry credentials. I was also using this in the post-build action. And then it will read the username and password from this credentials, and then it will set two variables, conveniently named username and password, and fill it with the values of my username and password. And the good thing is that even though I'm using this in a shell step, it will hide them in the build logs, so you won't be seeing them there. So then all that's left to do is just download the Pivotal CLI to be able to interface with Cloud Foundry, set the API endpoint, log in, set the target, and then do a CF push. And this will basically do the same as the post-build action did in the traditional build. So let's take a look if the build succeeded. Well, it's green. Green is good. It should have deployed version 10.25. We're just running on 24, and it's now deployed version 1.25. So if you don't believe me, there it is. So now we know that the build that worked pre-upgrade still works post-upgrade. But now let's say goodbye to the traditional builds and start creating a new build. So I'll be creating my first pipeline.
Let's get a couple of questions actually before.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll be good. Happy to take them.
So actually, let's start with a general question actually. So we have Riftware asking, is platform agnostic from Jenkins' point of view, or is it worth considering what operating system you're running on underneath?
Yeah, SH will just execute the system shell.
Okay.
So when you're running on Windows, it will probably use CMD. When you're running on Mac or Linux, it will use the shell that you've configured for the user that Jenkins is running on.
Okay, so that's interesting. So there will be a mapping to, so if you are using Windows, now you need to...
Yeah, if you're using Windows, then yeah, you need to configure your builds so that they will work correctly on your CI machine. Yeah. If you want to test them locally, then it's easy just to run the same platform locally as on CI.
Okay.
So I mostly run on Mac and have builds on Linux, so that's fairly compatible.
Okay, so that was Andrew Chan.
And as long as it's regarding to Maven, as long as MVN is on the path, it will work regardless where you're running. Since if CMD runs Maven or Bash runs Maven, the result will be the same.
Okay. Another question from Tabanta, which is, in fact, that's probably, is that a Dutch name?
I know Gijs pretty well. So
he's saying, please mention sometimes if it's either a scripted or declarative pipeline.
Yeah. So that's actually a good point. From now on, I'm only showing scripted pipelines because the declarative pipelines haven't been around for too long. I'm used to the scripted pipelines and also very fond of the scripting part and the reuse part. So unless told otherwise, I'll demoing scripted pipelines. So.
What's the difference between a scripted and a declarative pipeline?
Well, the difference is mainly in the syntax and in the features it supports. So when using a scripted pipeline, you have access to all the features that Groovy offers you. So you can create classes, methods, and include stuff. Declarative pipeline is more like a textual kind of JSON-like definition that will be parsed by Jenkins. Okay. So they're both DSL, but one is a Groovy DSL and the other one isn't.
Okay. And one from Neuromantic 33. Is there a place where we can browse example pipelines? So I guess
yes, definitely. I'll be sharing these at the end of my talk. Actually, I'm currently working at the Dutch National Police, and we've shared all our pipeline libraries at GitHub. Cool. So if you go to GitHub/politie, which is Dutch for police, there's a big library of example pipelines there.
So
GitHub/yes.com/POLITIE. And then there's a pipeline library repository there. That will be updating every now and then.
Nice.
All right, so any more?
That's everything for now. I've popped that into IRC for those who don't want a typo.
So let's continue. We were about to build our first pipeline, or actually the pipelinized version of our traditional build. So I'll be calling this my Spring Boot sample pipeline. I'll click pipeline and I'll create it. And then basically all the configuration I have to do in the Jenkins GUI is that I'm pointing it to a pipeline definition. So you can either start typing a pipeline here in the GUI, but what you typically want to do is use a pipeline script from version control. In this case, Git. And I'll just point it to my GitHub repository. It's the master branch, and it will then read the Jenkins file from this repository and configure the build based on the definition in the Jenkins file. So it's now configured. Let's trigger a build. So if we take a look at the build logs, we'll see that it's basically doing the same thing it was before. It's checking out the project, it's then doing the configuration, then the Maven build starts, and in the end it will trigger the deployment to Cloud Foundry. And here you'll see the stage view of the pipeline forming. So for every stage I defined in the Jenkins file, there's a stage appearing here with timings included and logs you can view. So there were 2 shell steps. I think you just refreshed. Here, and here's the Maven version step. So it's now triggered the deployment. Let's see how far we are. It's now updating the app in Cloud Foundry. About the GUI changes, let me do that in between. Doesn't change that much, it still fairly looks the same as Jenkins 1. One thing that has changed is that the build configuration is something where you typically need to scroll a bit. There are now some tabs here that you can use to easily navigate to the different parts of your build. But it's not really a shocking improvement. The good stuff is in Blue Ocean, which I'll be showing later. So let's see where we are deployment-wise. It's now downloading the build packs, and it should be up in not too long from now. So as you can see, I forgot to set the version number, so I've rebuilt version 101. So we'll be going from version, what was it, 25 to 1. This is a new reality we're going to get in. So the container has been destroyed, and it will start. Start my Spring app now. So it will be there in a few seconds. So it has started, and now version 101 should be deployed here, which is, so I essentially built the same app, but I've now used a pipeline definition to do the same steps that I did in my traditional build. So I did show you a fair amount of pipeline code, especially this properties thing here. So do you need to learn how to type this in all by heart? I wouldn't advise to do so. There's lots of stuff that can help you in getting your pipeline definitions in order. So when you've created a pipeline build, there are some things that can help you below the link pipeline syntax. If you go there, there's a step reference, a variables reference, and an online documentation. So the step reference just gives you some general introduction on how these steps work. And there's also a DSL reference that will describe all the different parts that are in your DSL. Most of these DSL things are usable in the scripted as well as the declarative pipelines. It's just more about how you chain the different DSL steps together. That will make a difference whether you'll be using scripted or declarative pipelines. Then there's a lot of global variables you can use. Stuff like the environment, the branch name, the build ID, the display name. These are all stuff that you can use in shell steps in your build. And then there's the online pipeline definition at jenkins.io, which is also fairly extensive, and usually you can find there whatever you're looking for. But when you're just getting started with pipelines, there's one thing that I like the most, And this is the snippet generator. And a snippet generator basically has all the steps that were in the traditional point and click GUI of Jenkins. And you can fill it in there as if you would in a traditional job, and then click generate, and it will generate the accompanying pipeline code. So let's take a look at the properties, the build properties. So I want to discard all builds, keep only 10 builds, link it to my GitHub project. Let me zoom it in a bit. I'll pull, well, I won't pull because I need to type something more for that. Let's see, yeah, that'll be about it. You can click generate pipeline and it will generate that pipeline code for you. So you can just copy paste this into your Jenkins file. And that's fairly useful when just getting started with learning the pipeline syntax. Some stuff is trivial. For example, if you want to do a git checkout. Let's see, you just type the URL of your repo. And then it will just be git and then the URL of your repo. So probably you can remember that, but the properties part is a bit more complex. And one thing that's also really useful when developing pipelines is the replay functionality. So on every successful or not too disastrously failed pipeline, there's a replay button. If you play replay, you'll see the exact pipeline that was executed. And you can just type in there, and even some more advanced stuff like commenting lines, then press run, and then the pipeline will run again, but with the changes you did on the fly. So this really helps when prototyping and debugging stuff, and it saves you from changing it in your Jenkins file, pushing it and triggering another build. It gets you a bit faster turnaround time for any developing pipelines. So I use it a lot when trying out new stuff. This doesn't save anything, so don't forget to copy paste it into your IDE when you're done. Otherwise your changes will be gone whenever you start the next build.
Interesting question, actually. There's a few questions, but this one's particularly relevant about how you can specify during your Git checkout that you use the same branch that's in your Jenkins file.
Yeah, how you can specify during Git checkout to use the same branch as your Jenkins file. You can specify, you can explicitly specify which branch you would check out. I think by default, it's Jenkins will be using the same branch as your Jenkins file is in. But if you want to check out another branch, you can override the branch where it's checking out from. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Any more questions?
We've got a couple that we can ask now about test archiving. So can you talk about where, this is from Kumar and IRC, can you talk about where you are uploading the JUnit results?
Oh yeah, that's just standard Jenkins behavior. It will archive the test results with the build. So just under test result at the Jenkins build. So it's just the default Jenkins JUnit integration. So it gets archived somewhere in the build directory with this job.
Okay. There's one more at the end about Blue Ocean, but we can probably
I'll
talk about
demo Blue Ocean for sure. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Cool.
All right, so that's it for this demo. Let's continue. I think I've explained most of this. The pipeline syntax, you can use the built-in snippet generator. One thing I forgot to show you, which I'll be showing you right now, is that there's a groovy DSL definition. Let me look it up. Which is here for IntelliJ. So if you're using IntelliJ, you can download this DSL file, which is a description of the Jenkins scripted pipeline definition. You can throw it in your IDE, and then you will get stuff like syntax highlighting and code completion on your Jenkins pipelines, which I found really useful when just learning stuff. The pipeline reference at the Jenkins side is pretty good. If you're trying to get plugins working, first place to look would be the plugin documentation. If plugins haven't been updated yet to support a pipeline variant, either roll it your own, or you can also dive in the plugin source, since they're typically just Java code that's interfacing with Jenkins in some sort. And I had some success with calling these Java APIs directly for my pipelines if I want to use a plugin of some sort. So that might be your last resort, just dive into the plugin source. So I'll be showing some useful snippets. You can find all of these at the Police GitHub repository. So no rush in, try to copy them on your machine. Archiving the artifacts, so if you want to keep some build artifacts, for example, jars or logs to your build, you can just say archive artifacts and tell them which files you'd like to archive. These will get stored with your Jenkins build. Again, nothing new, but just a way of doing this in the pipeline syntax. Setting build properties, I think I already showed this in some more detail. In this case, I will tell it to keep the last 10 builds, which will prevent your builds from piling up when you're running a lot of builds after each other. Email notifications. It is Groovy code, so there are exceptions there. So you can use to try catch, and whenever an error occurs, you can do something with that error. In this case, send an email whenever a build fails. So here I'm determining the subject and the body, and then using the mail plugin to send a mail to one or more users that are relevant for this build. You can also include other Groovy files. So we use this to have a file where we define all our constants, for example, version numbers or URLs of environments. So we have a constants.groovy with a few constants in there, and then in our Jenkins files we load this file, and then you can use it in your shell steps somewhere else by just referencing the class name and the constant name. This I found particularly useful. You can create libraries of reusable workflow steps. So we did this to put all the stuff that's repetitive for multiple builds in one library. And you put this library in the source folder of a Git repository. Then it's just like the standard Java or Groovy package format. You define a package, put a Groovy file in there, define a method there. And then you can import this library in Jenkins files by just saying add library, name of the library. And then you can use the methods in this Groovy class in your Jenkins file. So this is a real nice way to kind of encapsulate repeating behavior and really allow reuse from your Jenkins file. So what we typically do is we have all the build definitions and steps in a library. And the Jenkins files for our builds itself are really small. They only just bring up a library and call some pipeline step, and then the rest will run from the library. So you need to do one thing in order to make this work, because you need to tell Jenkins what library with the name pipeline library where it resides. So you can do this in the Jenkins GUI. You can define global libraries there. So I've defined a library with the name pipeline library. It's using the master branch of this repository. Then you just fill in the URL to your repository. Then we'll start looking in the source folder of this repository. And this enables you to create reusable pipeline steps and reuse it in multiple Jenkins files. So there's one a bit more advanced example about running parallel on multiple Jenkins nodes. So imagine you have one master node and a number of executor nodes that will do the heavy lifting on the jobs for you. So here there's one stage that will check out the project and then stash the results of this build step. And stash means copy a determined set of files and stash it to be used later in this build process. So I'm stashing it with the name source, and this means that wherever further on in my build process I can unstash the name source, and I will get the files that I stashed before, will get them back. So it's not really a good example for a checkout, because you can easily do a checkout again. But imagine that you have a build step that takes 30 minutes, and then you want to spread this out over multiple nodes. Then it might be useful to stash the results and then distribute it to other nodes, because by default data lives only on the node you're currently executing on. So if you're executing on node 1, then continuing your job on node 2, you don't have access to the data that was created on node 1. So that's where you need to stash the data for. So here in the test stage, I'm going in parallel. So there were two parallel phases, a unit test phase and an integration test phase. One will, not really surprisingly, run the unit tests, and the other one will run the integration tests in parallel, and then at the end they will come back together. So this is how you can parallelize your build or sections of your build over multiple executor nodes. Any more questions we can take? Or shall I just march on?
We have a few if you wanted to take some.
Yeah, sure.
So we have Michael Young asking, can a build be executed on a command line, e.g. on a developer's machine without installing a Jenkins?
There is an API in Jenkins you can call, so you can trigger builds from remote, but that's probably not what the question is about. You can use Jenkins API to validate the correctness of Jenkins files, if they are declarative Jenkins files. If you want to run it locally without installing, I would suggest just fire up a Jenkins Docker container and testing it there. I think that's the easiest way to do so. We usually when we test our Jenkins file, we just test it on our production Jenkins, and we hardly ever break it when testing, so that's typically fairly safe to do so.
Okay. A couple of other questions. IntelliJ code completion works for declarative pipeline?
I haven't tried it yet. So if Gijs would be so kind to find it out for us and report back, we'd be happy to hear.
Okay. Mr. Ducko, sorry, not Dr. Ducko. I don't believe he's graduated like that. Could you talk a bit about the Docker integration?
I haven't really got that much experience with it, so I don't think I'm qualified to tell that much about it, but I'll be interested to hear about it if someone else would like to. So.
Here's another question from Kuziomek. Can you show where the pipeline code is stored and if you can commit it into GitHub?
Yeah, so the pipeline code is stored just in a text file besides my code. So I have my example project here, where the code resides. Then the Jenkins file is just in the root of the project. So whenever I want to change my Jenkins file, I change it here, and then I push this project to GitHub, and then Jenkins sees a push. And at the start of every build, it will fetch the Jenkins file from GitHub, and then use a new definition.
Okay. And those are all our questions at the minute.
All right. So let's go.
Sorry, there's a couple on the YouTube live chat as well. Let's have a look. We have Michael asks if there's any support for Kotlin instead of Groovy. Kotlin's becoming a really important language these days,
thing. I haven't heard about it. I know that the internals of Jenkins are mostly Java and Groovy based. Yeah. So I'm not sure about Kotlin. Not that I know of. Okay. But my knowledge isn't that far that it could exist without me knowing. So. Yeah.
That's it. That's all we got.
All right. So let's see what's up next. Yeah, so it's time for our next demo. Okay. I'll be showing the multi-branch pipeline, which is kind of like a regular pipeline, but it will automatically scan your Git repository, see which branches are in there. Then for each branch, it will check if there's a Jenkins file in there, and if it's there, we'll automatically create a pipeline for that branch. So this is fairly useful when you work a lot with pull request flow and feature branches and stuff like that. So I'll create a multi-branch pipeline. And basically all you need to do is say, it runs by Jenkins file. I'm not sure what the other modes are. There's just one mode, so no surprise there. I'm adding a source, which is Git, pointing into my GitHub repository. And that's about it. You can configure some other stuff, but I'm just using the defaults. And now we'll connect to my repository. It starts checking it. It's found the master branch, which we've built before. And it's found the feature one branch. So now here it has created 2 builds that will start running right away. I'm not sure if I'm happy with the on detection, the branches getting started build right away, but when you're pushing a new branch, this certainly can come in handy. And these both have the definition, you're using definition in the Jenkins file on the respective branch. So if I would want to test some changes in my Jenkins file, I could create a new branch, change the Jenkins file there, push it, and then that branch will get built using the Jenkins file in that branch. So it's a fairly flexible scenario because it will use the Jenkins file that's together with the code in the branch you've pushed to. So I'll just keep this running. It will probably work out. And as requested, and also as planned before, I'll now demo the Blue Ocean UI.
Before we jump to that, couple of last questions before we jump onto that. Neuromantic says, do you have any idea when the pipeline DSL will be able to support Groovy? Okay, hang on, that's Groovy idiomatisms.
Yeah, there's some stuff like using
So not
yeah.
always using non-CPS.
Yeah, that's a fairly advanced question, and I would like to go into discussion about it, but I don't think the time will be now because it won't be relevant for a lot of viewers.
Okay.
So just reach out on Twitter to me, and then we have a chat afterwards.
What's your
It's at BJ Schrijver.
Or no,
SCHRIJVER. That's me. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll add that into our.
Yeah, we discuss later. It's a good question.
Another question. Any idea about managing Jenkins with a DSL? For
Adding and
example,
configuring nodes. Well, that's a good question. If you could dynamically add nodes by using a DSL. Well, you could, but then you would more look into the direction of automatically spinning up nodes with a specific label. So one of my clients, we've used the EC2 slaves plugin, where Jenkins will automatically spin up Jenkins executor nodes on Amazon EC2 when there's work to do. So this really makes sure your build setup scale horizontally. When there's a lot of work, a lot of nodes will spin up, and if not, the nodes will scale down, and you won't be paying for idle executor nodes. So this is something you might use. I'm not aware of a DSL to add and remove executors, but it's something that you could definitely do using the Jenkins API. So you could write something on top of that.
Okay, cool.
That's it for the questions?
That's it for the questions? I can't
then let's go for the goods. So Blue Ocean, it might come as a shock to some of our viewers, because Jenkins will suddenly start looking somewhat sexy. There's colors and stuff, and suns and green icons. So I really like this UI, and the goal is to create a complete new, not just a look and feel, but a complete new user experience for Jenkins. And the team has started with working on the pipeline stuff because that's the most visible and new in Jenkins too. And the goal is to have this gradually replace the entire Jenkins UI. So if we go to pipelines, then we see the pipelines I've defined before here. So take a look at the multi-branch pipeline. We have our two branches here. Let's take a look at the master branch, and then we'll see kind of same stage definition as we saw before, but then a bit nicer. And if you take a look at the build step, then we can view the logs here, and the Maven details fold out. So this is all looking fairly fresh and nice. And there's also some details about which changes were in there, how did the tests run, and which artifacts were produced. I'm not using this really that much because the traditional view of pipelines is sufficient for me at the moment. But as this matures and more functionality will get put in here, I think definitely we'll get more traction and more users. So I really like it. It's a good step forward from the not so sexy UI that we're all used to. And then there's something else new, which is even newer. And this is the visual editor for pipelines. So if we create a new pipeline, and I'll just create a new one here. You have a visual editor for creating declarative pipelines. So let's say we can run on any agent, and at a build step, this will be build, and it will be a generic shell step. And we'll just say Maven clean verify. So here we have the node declaration. Here we have the shell script, and now we can say load save. And then the declarative pipeline code will be generated. So this is really a nice way of getting to know pipelines, and especially when you have more complex pipelines, I think this can help to visualize what your pipeline definition is doing and when and what's in parallel and whatnot. And what's even better is this works both ways. So I showed my first declarative pipeline before. So if I copy this and paste it into the editor here, need to zoom out a bit because otherwise I can't reach the update button. It's still in beta. Then here's the visualization of the pipeline script I created. So it runs on an agent. It will check out my repository. It will do a Maven build, and then it will archive the test results in the end. So I think this is a really nice addition, especially for users getting started. Also for users who aren't really accustomed to writing DSLs or writing Groovy code. So I think this can really help out. And it's a nice visual way of showing how your pipeline will behave.
How does that scale as the pipeline gets enterprise?
Yeah, that's a good question. I kind of had the same question this morning in my talk. I haven't really had experience with very large pipelines, so for now, as long as it fits on my screen, I'm happy. How it will scale for very enterprisey pipelines, I think that's an interesting question for the Jenkins
So it's not the UI that needs to scale; it's the screen, really.
Yeah, I think so.
Screen manufacturers,
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah, or just zoom out until your eyes hurt.
Excellent.
So we'll see about it.
Perfect.
This is still fairly in beta, but they're progressing, and it's starting to shape up nicely.
Awesome.
So where were we at this demo, I believe? Yes, any more questions?
One coming from Pass it's a more generic question, not to do with what we just saw there, but in multi-branch pipeline, when you remove a branch, also is the corresponding job deleted?
Yeah, I think it is. I haven't tried it, but since it's polling, I think the job will be removed. But it will be something to try out. We'll see about that actually. Let's just try it out right now, and then we'll know.
Another question while you're doing that from Alexi in live chat. What's the difference between pipeline and node as root element?
Pipeline is the root element that's mandatory for all decorative pipelines. So it needs to start with a pipeline, and a node will define on which executor node that part of the pipeline will run. So you always have one pipeline block and one or more node definitions inside that block.
You're going to need to make that a bit bigger as well.
Yeah, it's not, I'm just going to throw away the remote branch.
Oh, okay.
So let's see what happens with, I'm not sure if I need to push this. Let's see what happens with the